Boys, we've done it. Climate change is no more. We can just throw out the Paris Agreement. Let's repeal all those EPA regulations. Oh, right. Those haven't really been a thing for a while. Anyways, climate change has been solved because for just $10 a month, you can buy Myro and save the environment. Yeah. So if you didn't know, Myro is a self-proclaimed, eco-friendly, subscription-based deodorant service. Essentially, they're based on a refillable model, so instead of buying the entire container every time, you would instead buy their refill pot, made with 50% less plastic. This all sounds great. So, what's the issue? Well, if we take a closer look, they essentially make two claims to achieve that planet-friendly label: that the pods are recyclable and that they use less plastic. So the first claim is pretty easy to call into question, because recycling has never been sustainable, logistically speaking. To recycle. Some content from my last video. Most of us are recycling wrong, from plastic bags to pizza boxes. And the issue is that these often contaminate the recycling pool. In general, avoid recycling food-stained items like pizza boxes and coffee cups. Part of the reason why it's so hard to recycle correctly is because recycling rules can differ between states, between counties, and even between neighboring towns. Not to mention, we produce too much trash in the first place for our recycling facilities to handle. Along with most other first world countries, we used to ship most of our garbage to China until 2018, when they enacted their national sword policy banning 99% of imports. Recycling has been hit globally, with some places scrapping their recycling programs altogether. Even before, however, China would throw most of the garbage out anyways because it would be too contaminated to recycle. And none of this is new information. The plastic industry has known about this for years, as exposed by the FRONTLINE documentary.
But even as Leesmer and his colleagues were publicly promoting recycling, privately, the industry had long expressed doubt it was ever going to happen on a broad scale. One internal document from the Society of the Plastics Industry cautioned, "The techniques of cleaning and separating the mixed plastics has not been developed for large-scale economic application." Another said, "There are no effective market mechanisms for mixed plastic." And this document was candid. There is serious doubt widespread plastic recycling can ever be made viable on an economic basis.
The whole thing is available on YouTube for free, by the way. Another issue with their recyclable claim is that it implies that other deodorant brands aren't recyclable. In reality, Native and Tom's of Maine, Myro's direct competitors in the natural deodorant niche, are also recyclable. The only difference is that Myro is made with number 2 plastic, while Native and Tom's of Maine are made with number 5 plastic. And this is where things get interesting. While it is true that number 2 plastic is more commonly recycled than number 5 plastic, there is actually a recycling program called Gimme 5, which specifically takes number 5 plastic and turns it into new products. You can drop off the plastic at Whole Foods or mail it in, and they'll use existing recycling infrastructure to create new products, from toothbrushes to dishware. And given how there's a serious lack of a market for plastic right now, I would argue that the plastic given to Preserve has a greater chance of getting recycled compared to plastic picked up curbside. Well, at least they use less plastic, right? Well, if you look at net weight, Myro's pods are actually 2 ounces, which is slightly smaller than the standard 2.56 ounces of their competitors, and this translates to usage. With average usage, Myro's pods only last about a month, while a stick of native lasts for about 2 months. So even though these planet-friendly pods may be made with 50% less plastic, you have to buy them twice as often. Not to mention, the 50% is probably exaggerated. As we mentioned before, Myro is made with number 2 plastic, whereas their competitors are made with number 5 plastic. Number 5 plastic is actually a lighter weight plastic compared to number 2, which is a stiffer resin, meaning it takes less energy to make and less energy to transport. In fact, dairy company Stonyfield estimates that by using number 5 plastic for their yogurt cups, they manage to save more than 100 tons of plastic each year. Now, you're probably wondering, how can we trust that statistic? Stonyfield is obviously going to be biased towards their own product, but Stonyfield is actually a B Corp, which is a third-party certification that verifies that they are committed to pursuing environmental and social justice. Which leads me to my next point. Myro has no third-party certifications. I'm not saying that they have to be like Patagonia, which is the gold standard of certifications, but even fellow deodorant company Tom's of Maine is a B Corp. And for a company that has been wildly successful in terms of funding and consumer popularity, that has staked its identity on doing what Tesla did for Prius and making sustainability more mainstream, they have astoundingly done very little, if anything at all. And yet, this is an all too familiar predicament in the world of environmentalism. Despite the warnings from scientists for decades, sustainability only really entered the public conversation 2 years ago. And what have we really achieved since then? If we create a timeline, mid-2018 is when terms like zero waste began to enter the mainstream, and the mason jar became the paragon of sustainability. There became a visibility around our waste, from the straw bans of Seattle to the plastic bag bans of New York. This urgency continued in 2019 when New York declared a climate emergency. And then the coronavirus hit. The bans turned out to be short-lived, despite no evidence of them perpetuating the virus any more than their plastic alternatives do. Not to mention, having customers bag their own groceries would have achieved the same effect. The Trump administration, which had been consistently relaxing regulations on pollution for these past 4 years, became more proactive, either by citing the coronavirus as an excuse or refusing to update industry standards on things like air pollution. So this is of course a non-exhaustive list, but if we look at the actions that we've taken these past 2 years, a pattern emerges. None of them do enough, or they actively worsen the problem. Let's look at the plastic bag bans first. Essentially, we banned plastic bags and replaced them with paper bags, while providing an incentive to use reusable bags. The thing is, paper bags aren't better than plastic bags. They're just unsustainable in a different way. They take 4 times as much energy to produce, they require forests, a carbon sink to be cut down, and they take more energy to transport. And reusable bags are even more resource heavy to produce. A study from the UK Environment Agency estimates that a cotton tote needs to be reused 131 times to offset its footprint, which is about once a week for 3.5 years. And most people aren't using their reusable bags correctly, routinely forgetting them at home and rarely cleaning them. In fact, it's estimated that the actual reuse rate is only about 15 times. The zero waste movement faces a similar story. A cursory search on the internet reveals aesthetic glass cups, mason jars, reusable straws, bamboo utensils, etc. And yet, these things aren't more sustainable when they just encourage needless consumerism. When I first became zero waste, every zero waste video I watched had some form of these specialty items, and so I bought into the idea that I had to buy zero waste things. I actually bought a set of cheaply made wooden utensils off of Amazon that shipped in plastic, rather than use the metal utensils that I already had. And I'm not alone in this. There are so many people who buy new mason jars from Walmart or Target rather than use the old jars and food containers that they probably already had. Sustainability has been commandeered into a selling point rather than anything meaningful. Which brings us back to Myro. Because the problem with Myro isn't with Myro at all. It's with the idea that we can just buy our way to sustainability. It's with our current war on plastic where we have essentially replaced one problematic material with another. As I've become more interested in environmentalism, I've noticed how often we wait for miracles. We place our hopes on plastic-eating bacteria. We build complex machines to collect all the garbage in the ocean. We create solutions to problems that should not exist. There is no easy solution to climate change. No miracle we can rely on. Instead, we need to fundamentally address our habits of overconsumption. We must buy less. We must consume more consciously. We must aim for a more circular economy. And most importantly, we must do so sooner rather than later. It's not a marketable answer like Myro or as Instagrammable as a mason jar. But using less plastic is easier than dealing with microplastic pollution. Preventing climate change is easier than reckoning with its irreversible effects. And if we are so unable to make the easier decisions now, how will we be able to make the harder decisions later?